Chapter 21, Department of Commerce. Thomas F. Gilman. The Department of Commerce is charged with promoting economic growth, innovation, and competitiveness while providing the data that American businesses need to succeed. Intended to serve with clarity of purpose as the voice of business in any president's cabinet, the Department of Commerce has suffered from decades of regulatory capture, ideological drift, and lack of focus. One long-standing joke maintains that the department, with its lack of coherence, is a holding company for the parts of the federal government that could not be housed elsewhere. Thus, in the 1990s, calls emerged to abolish the department and either spin off, zero out, or consolidate its functions among other entities. At the same time, the department has a higher profile now than perhaps ever in its history. It possesses key tools to address decades of poor decision-making in Washington and is central to any plan to reverse the precipitous economic decline sparked by the Biden administration and a counter-communist China. Both assertions can be equally true that the department possesses the expertise, programs, and authorities that will be crucial to the success of a conservative presidency, and that its role in the federal bureaucracy would benefit from streamlining and reform. Many programs at the Department of Commerce overlap in whole or part with other governmental programs, and consolidating and streamlining these could increase both accountability and return on taxpayer investment. Any exercise in government-wide budgeting and reform should review the department with an eye toward consolidation, elimination, or privatization that examines the efficiency, effectiveness, and underlying philosophy of each individual component. Though not an exhaustive set of proposals, the next conservative president should consider whether the International Trade Administration, ITA, and parts of the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, should be streamlined and moved to the office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, along with the Development Finance Corporation, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, the Export-Import Bank, and other trade-related programs spread across the federal government, as well as considering whether many of these programs should exist within the federal government. The Economic Development Administration's grant programs, which are among a broad set of duplicative and overlapping federal economic development grant programs, should be consolidated with other programs and/or eliminated. The Bureau of Economic Analysis and Census Bureau, as well as the Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, should be consolidated into a more manageable, focused, and efficient statistical agency. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USP2, should be made into a performance-based organization under the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Alternatively, the USPTO should be consolidated with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in a new U.S. Office of Patents, Trademarks, and Standards, with all non-mission critical research functions eliminated or moved to other, more focused federal agencies. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, should be dismantled and many of its functions eliminated, sent to other agencies, privatized, or placed under the control of states and territories. Almost every element of the department can be viewed through this lens, but with today's political reality and multiple competing congressional committee jurisdictions, drastic structural change to the department is neither imminent nor likely. Thus, this chapter largely accepts the baseline of today's department and proposes a bold, but achievable set of proposals for an incoming conservative administration. Whatever the imperfections of the Department of Commerce, it is blessed with many quality civil servants and strong statutory authorities that, directed properly, can help ensure U.S. success in 2025 and beyond. With that in mind, this chapter focuses primarily on policy strategy and occasionally tactics that are either immediately implementable under strong leadership or are critical to mission success. Office of the Secretary. The Office of the Secretary, OS, is somewhat of a misnomer, as very few of the thousands of employees working in the office are dedicated to staffing the Secretary and implementing administration priorities. Rather, OS's budget and full-time equivalents have increasingly been allocated to fulfill financial, human resources, administrative, information technology, contracting, and facilities functions, using outdated and inefficient systems. The Trump administration began implementing key changes, such as updating financial management tools, but more must be done to digitize and modernize the department's processes to free resources for secretarial and presidential priorities. The above drain on resources leaves the Secretary of Commerce to rely upon a few dozen direct support staff, supplemented with detailees and indirect funding from each of the bureaus to execute the president's agenda and manage the diverse functions of the department. This structure empowers career staff in each bureau and makes it harder to mandate change. As such, it is vitally important that an incoming administration fully staff OS with political appointees, send all existing detailees back to their home bureaus on day one, and replace those detailees with trusted and knowledgeable career staff on an as-needed basis. Department of Commerce leadership should also fight to restore direct funding and additional political appointee positions to OS and its constituent parts involved in implementing and communicating the Commerce Secretary's and President's policy priorities, administration, budget, and appropriations. Recent practice has been for career staff to serve as gatekeepers between department leadership and external budget and appropriations partners at the OMB and on Capitol Hill. By serving not just as a central point of contact, but as the sole staff-level communicators of departmental priorities, these career officials can, have, and will slow down and even stop changes in policy, even at the line office level. Although the following is true at all agencies, it is particularly important at the Department of Commerce that political leadership be immediately installed at the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, CFO, and Assistant Secretary for Administration, ASA, and that political appointees receive a mandate to communicate with external partners alongside career staff at every stage of the budget and appropriations process. Political appointees must also monitor internal CFO operations down to the operating division level to ensure that funds are not being diverted to programs that do not align with administration priorities, as has regularly happened in years past. Advisory committees. Due to the nature of the Department of Commerce's portfolio, many of its advisory committees are populated by activists from organizations openly hostile to conservative principles who use the committees to impede conservative policy. Upon entering office, all such committees should be reviewed regarding whether they are required by statute and abolished, if they are not. Membership of the remaining committees should be reconstituted to ensure they are sources of genuine expert advice and productive contributions to the policymaking process. Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, compliance and awareness of any ways the committees have been written into regulations should be considered. International Trade Administration. The International Trade Administration is centrally placed to craft and implement U.S. trade policy. Core to ITA's mission is the expansion of trade and investment and the fostering of job creation, innovation, and economic growth, while also providing research and analysis that support USTR's trade negotiations. ITA carries out this mission on behalf of American workers, ranchers, and families. As discussed elsewhere, historically, conservatives have argued that many federal government trade and investment-oriented functions amount to corporate welfare or protectionism. There is a growing counter-argument within the conservative movement, contending that in a world in which managed trade is the norm rather than the exception, and in which authoritarian governments, especially China, continually seek to undermine U.S. interests, the U.S. cannot unilaterally disarm. To do so would harm the cause of free trade in the long term, and, in any event, Congress is not likely to drastically change the composition or authorization of the ITA. Thus, a policy and management agenda that serves conservative priorities is crucial. In a conservative administration, the ITA should operate with the following priorities: counter the malign influence of China and other U.S. adversaries, enforce agreements vigorously, and defend against trade violations, secure access to critical supply chains and technology, enable the private sector to drive innovation and remain globally competitive. It is important to note that a deeply entrenched set of career senior executive service officials have managed the ITA for over a decade. While most are truly nonpartisan civil servants, some are not. Political leadership must manage accordingly. Strong political leadership is needed in ITA's policymaking positions from day one to ensure the Bureau is fully implementing administration policy. An incoming administration should ensure that Assistant Secretary and Deputy Assistant Secretary positions are staffed by appointees as quickly as possible. Enforcement and compliance. Strong enforcement of trade agreements is an indispensable function of the ITA carried out by Enforcement and Compliance, ENC. Free and fair trade is impossible without energetic enforcement of existing agreements and without strong defense against dumping and illegal subsidies. Many free trade advocates consider anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws, ADCVD, to be protectionist and thus antithetical to the conservative free market position. In their view, ADCVD laws are overused, abused by certain industries, and harmful to American economic competitiveness by increasing costs to downstream industries. Other conservatives maintain that ADCVD tariffs are not conventional tariffs, but rather corrective actions meant to address anti-free market activities by other governments. A scalpel, not a hammer. In the short term, this may mean higher costs for U.S. businesses and consumers on a limited number of products from certain offending countries, but those higher prices correct existing price distortions in the marketplace and ultimately ensure the healthy operation of market forces in the long term and a level playing field for U.S. manufacturers. Whatever the case, improvements to the current system must be made to both protect U.S. consumers and companies from improperly applied duties and defend against trade-distorting actions by other governments. Procedures governing the day-to-day administration of proceedings, as well as policies driving critical decisions in proceedings, require a fresh look. Ultimately, ENC's mandate is to conduct a rigorous but also fair, objective, and balanced review of the record in each proceeding and to make decisions without bias. It is exceedingly unlikely that Congress would abolish or limit the activity of ENC. Therefore, the proposals below are made under the assumption that an incoming administration will operate ENC within its current legal, institutional, and political confines and set a path forward to wield ENC's considerable power to achieve the goals of a conservative administration. These proposals can be broken into three categories: process, policy, and addressing China. Process. Reestablish and expand suspended in-person pandemic-related verifications, particularly regarding the People's Republic of China. Ensure that verifications are rigorous. Implement advanced analytics and artificial intelligence to identify opportunities for self-initiation, detect circumvention, and prevent bad actors from gaming the system. Accelerate front-end work on reviews as opposed to constantly pushing against statutory deadlines. Work with Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and other relevant agencies to address circumvention and duty evasion, and promote policies that encourage full duty collection to ensure the integrity of AD/CVD and circumvention orders. Work with CBP, the Department of Justice, the Department of Treasury, and other relevant agencies to aggressively pursue importers of record and other beneficiaries for unpaid duties, and consider policy changes to reduce uncollected duties in the future. Work, pursuant to the above, with interagency partners in AD/CVD cases to either require foreign importers of record, IORs, to make cash deposits far in excess of established duty rates at the time of entry of AD/CVD merchandise, require IORs to register sufficient U.S. assets to ensure timely payment of duties, or otherwise prohibit IORs from importing AD/CVD merchandise. Conduct a regulatory capture audit and put guardrails in place to address improper exercise of bureaucratic prerogative. Policy. Ensure senior policy and decision-making positions are always held by political appointees. Reverse the practice of giving the benefit of the doubt to foreign companies versus U.S. companies in AD/CVD proceedings. Establish a policy for addressing companies that invest heavily in the U.S. and thus have large import volumes, exposing them to AD/CVD petitions. Establish an effective, fair, and objective process for self-initiation of AD/CVD proceedings when industry lacks the resources or ability to act. Addressing China. Revive the China-specific non-market economy unit. Provide transparency in the surrogate country list development process. Develop a new methodology to determine normal values in Chinese anti-dumping cases because, given China's size, economic might, and state intervention in the economy, there is no comparable surrogate country to use as a proxy for production costs. In addition to these changes, continued support for steel and aluminum market analysis and import monitoring remains crucial to the U.S. defense industrial base and the health of global manufacturing. Without these functions, it is difficult to address massive subsidization, overcapacity, and dumping by China. Industry and analysis. Industry and analysis, INA, consists of a team of economists and industry experts that provides important analysis to partners across the government, including the White House and USTR, as well as the public, As the Department of Commerce's Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States, CFIUS lead, INA performs crucial work to ensure that the proper economic impact supply chain analysis is brought to national security risk assessments. This analysis is needed for CFIUS to be an effective tool in preventing China and other adversaries from exploiting the U.S.'s open investment climate. INA also provides impact assessments and economic modeling for policy options under administration consideration, plays a critical role in identifying trade barriers and providing industry-specific expertise for USTR during Free Trade Agreement (FTA) negotiations, and does indispensable work ensuring cross-border data flows, particularly with Europe, remain open and relatively unrestricted. However, outside of these functions, implementation of INA's mission as an intellectual engine for U.S. trade and investment policy can often lack energy and focus. For instance, the top market reports that represent a large volume of INA work do not serve a specific strategic function and could be better replaced by industry competitiveness assessments in critical sectors of the economy. Strong and capable leadership is needed in INA to ensure administration priorities permeate the organization and that staff support administration priorities. INA produces a mandatory report to Congress regarding the miscellaneous tariff bill, which focuses solely on U.S. capacity in the goods being considered for tariff exclusions and does not include highly relevant information on capacity among FTA partners and close allies. The resulting final report has thus been used to lobby for tariff reductions on thousands of imports from China without concern for any other factors. This lack of priority given to FTA partners is troubling. Going forward, INA should be permanently restructured to perform supply chain analysis on an ongoing basis for the U.S. government, identifying potential vulnerabilities like those exposed by the pandemic and resulting shortages in everything from semiconductors to baby formula. Furthermore, permanent standing teams should be established and staffed by properly aligned political appointees and trusted career staff to analyze and spur action on the following priority policy issues: strategic decoupling from China, defense industrial base strength, critical supply chains, e.g., pharmaceuticals, medical devices, food, and emerging technologies, e.g., rare earth minerals, semiconductors, batteries, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, global markets, and the U.S. and foreign commercial service. For more than a decade, strategic planning at global markets, GM, and the U.S. and foreign commercial service, CS, has been consistently undermined by increased costs associated with overseas staff and flat or reduced budgets. The Trump administration introduced crucial, long overdue business practices such as the implementation of software to manage and track workflow, but a further strategic overhaul of resource allocation is needed to set GM and the CS on a firm footing. Currently, CS manages staff spread over 106 domestic offices in 77 countries around the world. Abroad, several partner posts utilize interagency staff and regionally located CS officials to offer services without a permanent physical in-country CS presence. Given the rapidly rising costs imposed by the State Department on CS posts overseas, a drastic expansion of this model is likely needed. CS resources should be distributed according to the following set of priorities: value in countering the malign influence of adversaries, particularly China; value in fostering U.S. innovation, value in maintaining access to critical supply chains and technology, difficulty for U.S. companies in gaining market access without CS involvement, and potential untapped export market size and likelihood of expansion. Ultimately, difficult decisions must be made about the value of CS posts and whether individual posts can be justified given current resources and the above criteria. If the State Department deems the diplomatic value of a permanent in-country CS post to be vital to the national interest, then states should bear more of the cost of maintaining that post. Global markets should also consolidate and elevate the Advocacy Center and SelectUSA as relatively low-cost tools to drive large-scale export transactions and foreign direct investment, FDI. SelectUSA is a low-cost and effective tool in attracting FDI to the U.S. and to reshore manufacturing and research and development. In a world in which corruption is rampant, these are among the most effective tools in leveling the playing field for U.S. communities and companies seeking to engage with governments and potential overseas investors. Given the value placed on senior-level engagement by many governments and companies, this consolidated Office of Trade and Investment Advocacy should be headed by a Deputy Assistant Secretary. The new office should also seek congressional authorization to utilize its FDI promotion tools to encourage reshoring by U.S. businesses. Bureau of Industry and Security. During the past 2 decades, technology transfer from America and its allies has helped accelerate adversaries' technological and weapons capabilities. This technology transfer on a massive scale has occurred because of adversaries' exploitation of the U.S.'s open economy and education system through both commercial transactions and university and government research programs. Examples include the People's Republic of China's dramatic leaps forward in semiconductor design and fabrication, battery energy storage, nuclear weapons capabilities, artificial intelligence, space and aerospace engineering, and hypersonic weapons deployment. At the same time, the U.S. has systematically failed to protect critical assets. Rather than promulgate policies to better prevent technology transfer, the U.S. government has either ignored the problem or, worse, from 2008 through 2016, instituted a government-wide export control reform process to loosen the Export Administration Regulations, EAR, governing exports of dual-use items to facilitate technology transfer to adversaries, either directly or indirectly through third-country transfers. Those reforms still present in the Department of Commerce's EAR must be reversed. The United States needs stronger rules to protect technology transfer to adversaries while promoting technology integration and interoperability with allies. Further, U.S. export control regulations should be utilized to prevent theft of personally identifiable information and to encourage U.S. companies to shift production out of China and further diversify their supply chains to better advance U.S. national security interests. For all the below recommendations, BIS needs to move unilaterally while it works with allies to implement complementary export control policies. Waiting to act until allies are ready to move in lockstep is not an option, while America's national security is at risk. Emerging and foundational technologies. The Export Control Reform Act of 2018, ECRA, gave BIS permanent statutory authority to regulate exports of dual-use items, goods, software, and technology. ECRA also mandated that BIS regulate exports of emerging and foundational technologies. Although the scope of such technologies is vast, To date, BIS has only controlled just over 40 of these technologies. This does not meet the clear statutory intent of Congress that ECRA be leveraged to ensure that the United States maintains a technological advantage in technologies bearing upon national security interests. Currently, BIS self-identifies technologies that merit control under the EAR with minimal input from other federal agencies. This mechanism should be improved. BIS should create an open, transparent rulemaking process by which any industry participant, private entity, or branch of the government may, at any time, submit nominations for emerging foundational technologies for control. Then, on a quarterly basis, BIS should make public such recommendations while holding the identity of the submitter confidential for public input, followed by an explanation about its ultimate decision to control or not control the items, its reasons, the level of controls applied, stringent or permissive, and the relevant export control classification number, ECCN, under the Commerce Control List. Commerce should also institute a mechanism whereby its decisions can be challenged, including on a confidential basis. Licensing procedures, adjudication, and transparency. Currently, if the Departments of Defense, State, Commerce, and Energy disagree on an export license decision, the disagreement may be escalated to the Operating Committee and subsequently to the Advisory Committee on Export Policy, led by BIS's Assistant Secretary for Export Administration. The Assistant Secretary does not need to lead the dispute resolution, and this process should be revised by giving lead authority to BIS's Undersecretary, who is better able to account for diverging views. Moreover, BIS's authority to overrule other agency votes should be changed. Each agency should have one equal vote, and if a licensing dispute remains unresolved, the final decision should be elevated to the National Security Advisor and the Secretaries of Defense, State, Commerce, and Energy. Additionally, to improve congressional oversight of BIS's license adjudication process, BIS should provide specific congressional committees with data from the automated export system on a quarterly basis. Electronic files should contain U.S. exporter by name, product description, e.g., harmonized system code and ECCN U.S. munitions list designation, end user and destination country, and when a license was required, whether the license was granted or denied. BIS currently denies just 1.2% of export licenses. These data reporting requirements can help Congress better determine whether BIS is adequately protecting national security through appropriate use of export controls or whether additional direction from Congress is required. Improve end-use checks. The integrity of the export control system may be validated only through adequate end-use checks. BIS must deny export licenses to countries that do not permit adequate end-use checks, e.g., China, Russia, by U.S. authorities. BIS should also strengthen the forensic audit capabilities of its export enforcement officers through improved and frequent training so they are able to detect export control violations. EAR revisions. The U.S. government needs a new export control modernization effort to tighten the EAR policies governing licenses to countries of concern, including China and Russia. When authoritarian governments explain what they plan to do, believe them unless hard evidence demonstrates otherwise. Case in point, China's and Russia's stated civil-military fusion policies demand central government command and control style systems in which every private entity serves the interests of the state and is forced to provide technology, services, capacity, and data to the central government and the military. Through this structure, commercial activities are routinely weaponized by authoritarian regimes that repeatedly identify the U.S. as an enemy. Accordingly, U.S. export control policies must be updated to reflect these realities and the associated threats to national security. Key priorities for EAR modernization for countries of concern should be eliminating the specially designed licensing loophole, redesignating China and Russia to more highly prohibitive export licensing groups, country groups D or E, eliminating license exceptions, broadening foreign direct product rules, reducing the de minimis threshold from 25% to 10%, or percent for critical technologies, tightening the deemed export rules to prevent technology transfer to foreign nationals from countries of concern, tightening the definition of fundamental research to address exploitation of the open U.S. university system by authoritarian governments through funding, students and researchers, and recruitment, eliminating license exceptions for sharing technology with controlled entities, countries, through standard-setting activities and bodies, and improving regulations regarding published information for technology transfers. The next few years will prove or disprove the assertion that the U.S. stands on the precipice of a Cold War with China. Many believe that a Cold War has already begun. If so, then strategic decoupling from China is necessary, and fundamentally, any exports of goods, software, and technology to countries of concern, whether directly or indirectly, should be prohibited or controlled in the absence of good cause, e.g., humanitarian and medical aid, food aid. Entity list and sanctions. There are currently just over 500 Chinese and over 500 Russian companies on the Department of Commerce's entity list, which regulates exports of controlled and uncontrolled items to designated entities. Given China's civil-military fusion strategy and Russia's massive war efforts facilitated by a broad range of the Russian economy, BIS must add more entities to the entity list and apply a license review policy of denial that prohibits exports to these entities. Entity list parties that violate export controls should be placed on the BIS denied persons list and thereby lose export privileges. And if the violations are significant enough, they should also be sanctioned by the Department of Treasury. Data transfer and apps used for surveillance. Department of Commerce leadership should work across government agencies to address privacy and data concerns arising out of big tech from national security and export control perspectives. In particular, they should draft and implement an executive order, EO, based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which expands export control authority beyond ECRA's scope, goods, software technology, to regulate and restrict exports of U.S. persons' data to countries of concern. The EO should establish a framework for the types of personal data subject to export controls and licensing policy by country, and the BIS should implement the EO through regulations. BIS should additionally designate app providers, such as WeChat and ByteDance TikTok, known for undermining U.S. national security through data collection, surveillance, and influence operations, to the entity list. This listing would prevent APP users from program updates, which would quickly make these apps non-operational in the United States. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Break up NOAA. The single biggest Department of Commerce agency outside of decennial census years is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which houses the National Weather Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and other components. NOAA garners $6.5 billion of the department's $12 billion annual operational budget and accounts for more than half of the department's personnel in non-decadal census years, 2021 figures.